"I'm going to lose everything," James whispered, surveying his withering crops as the bank foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist. That's when he spotted here a woman in expensive cycling gear, struggling with a broken chain on the dirt road beside his farm. Little did he know that fixing that simple metal link would forge a connection that would save not just his land, but the entire community. Their eyes met across the dusty field, and somehow he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten for the first time in years. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The late August sun beat down mercilessly on James Harlow's weathered face as he surveyed his failing crops. 36 years old, with calloused hands and premature creases around his eyes, he looked like a man who had been fighting the same losing battle for decades. His once thriving family farm had dwindled to barely 50 acres of usable land, most of which was now dusty and unproductive, despite his relentless efforts. The foreclosure notice had arrived that morning, 90 days to somehow produce the money he didn't have, or lose the land that had been in his family for 4 generations. 5 years of drought conditions and the monopolistic practices of mid-corp agribusiness had squeezed small farmers like him to the breaking point. Every morning began with the same knot of anxiety tightening in his chest, and every night ended with him poring over numbers that never added up to salvation. "Damn it all," he muttered, folding the notice and shoving it deep into the pocket of his worn jeans. The only sound for miles was the occasional rustle of dying corn stalks and the distant purr of his ancient irrigation system fighting a losing battle against the parched earth. He'd sent his 2 farmhands home. Early he couldn't afford their hours anymore, though he'd made up some excuse about maintenance work. Pride was about all he had left. His wife Lauren had taken a second job in town at the local diner, working evenings to supplement their dwindling income, leaving their 10-year-old daughter Emma with James during those shifts. He hadn't told Lauren about the foreclosure notice yet. How could he tell her that despite every sacrifice, every 16-hour workday, every penny pinched, they were still going to lose everything? Lost in thought, he almost didn't notice the flash of bright colors on the dusty road that ran alongside his property. A cyclist in professional gear was bent over her upturned bicycle, frustration evident in her posture. Even from a distance, James could tell she wasn't a local. The sleek carbon fiber bike probably cost more than his truck, and nobody for Riverdale cycled for recreation on these back roads. For a moment, he considered pretending he hadn't seen her. He had his own problems, more than enough to deal with. But something about the woman's determined, yet clearly unsuccessful attempts to fix whatever was wrong with her bike made him sigh and change direction. His father had raised him to help those in need, especially strangers on your land. It was one of the unwritten rules of country living that James still honored, even as the world seemed to have forgotten such simple decencies. "Having trouble?" he called out as he approached, wiping his sweaty brow with a bandana from his back pocket. The woman straightened up, clearly startled by his voice. She was tall and athletic, with coffee-colored skin that glistened with perspiration, and short black hair tucked beneath a high-end cycling helmet. Her cycling outfit was bright blue and yellow, emblazoned with sponsors James didn't recognize. Everything about her screamed city person, from her expensive gear to the smartwatch on her wrist. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice carrying an accent that confirmed his suspicions. Definitely not local. "Yes, I'm afraid I've got a broken chain, and I seem to have left my repair kit at the hotel." She gestured helplessly at the bicycle. "I was hoping to get a proper look at the countryside before meetings tomorrow, but it seems I've stranded myself farther than I anticipated." James nodded and knelt beside the bike, examining the chain that had indeed snapped and tangled itself around the rear derailleur. "How far you got to go back?" "About 12 miles to Riverdale," she answered, looking worriedly at the position of the sun. "I don't suppose there's a bike shop around here?" James couldn't help the short laugh that escaped him. "Nearest bike shop's in Granton, about 30 miles that away," he said, pointing west. "But you're in luck. I can fix this for you." Her eyebrows rose. "Really? That would be amazing." She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious face. "Farm equipment breaks down all the time," he explained, already mentally cataloging what tools he'd need. "You learn to fix just about anything, or go broke paying someone else to do it. I've got a workshop about a quarter-mile up the road. I can give you and your bike a lift if you don't mind riding in a dusty pickup." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "That would be wonderful, thank you. I'm Alexandra, by the way. Alexandra Chen." She extended her hand. "James Harlow," he replied, shaking her hand and noting the surprising strength in her grip. "Let me just grab my truck. It's not far." 5 minutes later, Alexandra's expensive bicycle was carefully secured in the bed of his battered Ford F-150, and the cyclist herself was seated somewhat uncomfortably in the passenger seat, trying not to touch the various farming detritus that covered most surfaces. "Sorry about the mess," James said automatically as he started the engine. "Don't get many passengers these days." "Please, don't apologize," she said. "I'm grateful for your help. I was contemplating a very long walk in cycling shoes, which would have been miserable." As they bumped along the dirt road toward his farmhouse and workshop, James found himself oddly curious about this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere on his land. "So, what brings you out to these parts? We don't get many tourists, especially not ones on bikes worth more than most cars around here." Alexandra laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fill the truck cab. "Is it that obvious I'm not from around here?" "Just a bit," James replied with the ghost of a smile. "I'm here for work," she said after a moment. "I grew up in this region, actually, though not in Riverdale specifically. Left for college, and never really came back except for occasional family visits. Now work has brought me here, at least temporarily." "What kind of work has you cycling on back roads in farm country?" he asked, genuinely curious. A small, enigmatic smile played on her lips. "I'm in public service, you could say. And I always try to really see a place before making decisions about it. Maps and reports only tell you so much." Before James could inquire further, they arrived at his farmhouse, a 2-story white clapboard structure that had once been charming but now showed obvious signs of deferred maintenance. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on one side, and the paint was peeling in places, but the vegetable garden to the side was meticulously maintained, a splash of vibrant health in stark contrast to the struggling reed. "Fields beyond. Nice place," Alexandra commented as she carefully extracted herself from the truck. "Has it been in your family long?" "4 generations," James said, the familiar ache returning as he remembered the foreclosure notice. "My great-grandfather built it in 1923. He led her around to the side of the house, where a large metal workshop stood. Inside was a surprisingly well-organized space, with tools hanging neatly on pegboards and several workbenches. One corner housed farm equipment in various states of repair, while another seemed dedicated to smaller projects. "Impressive setup," Alexandra remarked, running her hand along one of the workbenches. James shrugged, already focused on the task at hand. He carefully positioned her bike on a stand and began examining the broken chain more closely. "Should be a quick fix. I've got some spare links that might work." As he worked, Alexandra wandered around the workshop, studying the various tools and projects with evident interest. "You do all repairs yourself?" "Have to," he replied, selecting a chain tool from a nearby drawer. "Can't afford to pay mechanics for every breakdown, and out here, you might wait weeks for service anyway." He paused, then added almost reluctantly, "Used to fix things for neighboring farms too, but most of them have sold out to the big agricultural companies now." "Made Corp?" she asked, surprising him with her knowledge. He looked up sharply. "Yeah. They've been buying up everything they can for the past decade. Offer prices that seem good until you realize what you're really giving up. Then they bring in their industrial methods, deplete the soil, and move on." Alexandra's expression darkened. "I've heard similar stories in other communities. How have you managed to hold out?" James focused on the chain, carefully aligning the new links. "Stubbornness, mostly. This land's been Harlow land since before my grandfather's time. We've weathered droughts and depressions before." He didn't mention the foreclosure notice burning a hole in his pocket. No need to share his failures with a stranger, no matter how sympathetic she seemed. "That's admirable," she said softly. "Too many people give up too easily these days." He snorted. "Some would call it foolish, not admirable. There's a fine line between the two, she replied with a small smile. Some of history's most admirable figures were called fools in their time. James didn't respond, focusing instead on testing the newly repaired chain. After a few adjustments, he pronounced it fixed. Good as new. Well, good enough to get you back to town at least. You might want to have it properly checked at a bike shop when you can. Alexandra beamed at him, her entire face lighting up with genuine gratitude. This is fantastic. You saved me from a very unpleasant hike. How much do I owe you? James waved away her question. Nothing. Took all of 10 minutes. Please, she insisted, reaching for her phone. I can transfer you something right now. Your time and expertise have value. So does common decency, he countered, feeling oddly irritated by her insistence on payment. Just helping a temporary neighbor anyway. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you then. I appreciate your generosity. As they loaded her bike back into his truck for the return journey to where he'd found her, James noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Storm's coming in. You sure you want to ride back? I could drive you to town. Alexandra glanced at the clouds and checked something on her watch. I think I'll be fine. According to the radar, I have about 2 hours before it hits, and I can make it back in less than 1 if I push the pace. James nodded, respecting her decision, even if he thought it somewhat risky. They drove in comfortable silence back to the spot where they'd met, and he helped her unload the bicycle. Well, good luck with your public service work, whatever it is, he said as she mounted her bike and tested the repaired chain. Thank you again, James, she said, extending her hand once more. Maybe our paths will cross again before I leave the area. Maybe, he agreed, though he doubted it. People like her educated, successful professionals rarely had reason to interact with struggling farmers like him more than once. As she pedaled away, James watched her receding figure for a moment, then turned back toward his fields with a sigh. The brief interaction had been a welcome distraction, but reality remained unchanged. He had 90 days to perform a miracle, or the land that had defined his family for generations would be lost forever. The rumble of approaching thunder echoed his mood as he trudged back toward the withering cornfield. Some battles couldn't be won with hard work alone, and he was beginning to fear this was one of them. 3 days later, James was attempting to repair his ancient tractor when he heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Visitors were rare these days. Even door-to-door salespeople seemed to have ridden off the remote farms as not worth the effort. He wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out of the workshop, squinting against the midday sun. A sleek black SUV had pulled up beside his weathered pickup truck, looking as out of place as a thoroughbred among workhorses. For one wild moment, he wondered if it was bank representatives coming to discuss the foreclosure in person, but the vehicle bore no corporate logos or identifying markers. The driver's door opened, and to his utter astonishment, Alexandra stepped out. Gone was the cycling gear, replaced by a tailored charcoal pantsuit and sensible heels. Her short hair was neatly styled, and she carried a leather portfolio under one arm. "Hello again, James," she called, smiling at his obvious surprise. "I hope you don't mind my dropping by unannounced." "Alexandra," he managed, wondering what could possibly have brought her back. "Didn't expect to see you again. Everything okay with the bike?" "The bike is perfect, thanks to you," she replied, approaching him with confident strides. "But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to talk to you about your farm, actually." James stiffened, wariness replacing surprise. In his experience, well-dressed people asking about his farm never brought good news. What about it? If she noticed his change in demeanor, she didn't show it. "I wondered if you might have time for a tour and conversation. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." "I'm pretty busy," he hedged, gesturing vaguely at the half-repaired tractor. Alexandra nodded understandingly. "Of course. Perhaps another time would be better? Or I could come back this evening if that works for you. It's rather important." James studied her, curiosity warring with caution. She didn't have the predatory look of a developer or corporate agent, but experience had taught him that the most dangerous offers often came with the friendliest smiles. "What's this about exactly?" he asked directly. She took a deep breath. I should have been clearer when we met. I'm Alexandra Chen, the newly elected mayor of Riverdale. I took office last week. James blinked in surprise. This elegant woman was the new mayor? He vaguely remembered hearing something about an election, but local politics had seemed irrelevant compared to his more immediate problems. I'm initiating a program to revitalize local agriculture, she continued. Small farms like yours are essential to that vision, and after our conversation the other day, I became particularly interested in your operation. My failing operation, you mean? James said bluntly, still bluntly. Processing this revelation, Alexandra's expression remained earnest. A temporarily struggling operation with strong potential for revival, I'd say. That's precisely what I want to discuss, how the town might partner with farms like yours for mutual benefit. James wiped his hands again on the already dirty rag, buying time to think. Part of him wanted to send her away. He had no interest in being a charity case or a political photo opportunity. But another part, the desperate part, that saw the foreclosure deadline looming, recognized that he couldn't afford to dismiss any potential lifeline, no matter how unlikely. I've got about an hour before I need to pick up my daughter from her summer program, he said finally. I can show you around if you want, but I'm not making any promises about partnerships or programs. That's all I'm asking for, Alexandra replied, her smile returning. Just a chance to share some ideas and get your input. As they began walking toward the fields, James couldn't help asking, why me? There are other farms around, some in better shape than mine. Because you helped a stranger without expectation of reward, she answered simply. That says something about character. And because you spoke honestly about MidCorp when you had no idea who I was. That kind of integrity is rare. Plus, she added with a slight smile, you clearly know how to fix things that are broken. James had no response to that. Instead, he began explaining the layout of his farm, pointing out the different fields and crops, describing the irrigation system he'd modified himself to maximize efficiency with minimal water usage. Alexandra proved to be a surprisingly knowledgeable listener, asking intelligent questions about soil composition, crop rotation, and water rights. As they walked, James found himself opening up more than he'd intended, describing not just the technical aspects of his operation, but the challenges he faced. The rising costs, the difficulty competing with industrial-scale operations, the increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. Water's the biggest issue, he explained, as they stood at the edge of a cornfield where the plants were visibly struggling. The aquifer's dropping every year, and MidCorp's operations upstream divert more than their fair share. We've had to drill our well deeper twice in the past decade. Have you considered alternative irrigation methods? Alexandra asked. There are some new technologies that use significantly less water. Considered it, sure, James said with a humorless laugh. But the upfront costs are prohibitive. Can't get loans for improvements when you're barely making mortgage payments. Instead of the sympathetic platitudes he expected, Alexandra nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly the kind of barrier our program is designed to address. We're establishing a municipal fund to help local farms transition to more sustainable methods, with grants and low-interest loans specifically for water-saving technologies. James squinted at her suspiciously. Where's this money coming from? Riverdale's not exactly flush with cash, last I heard. We've secured state and federal grants focused on agricultural sustainability and rural economic development. She explained. Plus, we've negotiated a settlement with MidCorp over their excessive water usage that's providing significant funding. That got his attention. You got MidCorp to pay up? How'd you manage that? A satisfied smile played across Alexandra's face. Let's just say my background before politics included environmental law, and we had very solid documentation of their violations. Sometimes corporations decide it's cheaper to settle than fight when the CA evidence is overwhelming. For the first time in months, James felt a tiny spark of hope, but he quickly tamped it down. Hope was dangerous. It made you vulnerable. Sounds interesting, he said cautiously. But what's the catch? There's always a catch. The catch, Alexandra replied, her expression turning serious, is that participating farms would need to commit to sustainable practices and be willing to serve as demonstration sites occasionally. We want to create a model that other communities can replicate. Oh, and you'd need to provide some data on productivity and water usage for our research partner at the state university." End quote. James considered this as they continued walking toward the small apple orchard that had been his grandfather's pride and joy, now reduced to just 20 trees that still produced despite minimal care. "These apples are amazing," Alexandra commented, gently touching one of the ripening fruits. "Local varieties? Heritage breeds," James confirmed. "My grandfather grafted them himself. Hardly anyone grows them commercially anymore. They don't ship well, and they're too inconsistent for supermarkets. But they taste better than anything you'll find in stores." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Alexandra said excitedly. "These are agricultural treasures that are being lost as farms like yours disappear. Part of our program includes developing local markets for exactly these kinds of products. Farm-to-table restaurants, farmers markets, direct-to-consumer subscriptions. People will pay premium prices for authentic, locally grown heritage produce." End quote. James shook his head skeptically. "Riverdale's too small to support that kind of market." "Riverdale alone, yes," she agreed. "But we're only 30 miles from Granton, which has a growing population of professionals who value quality food. And we're developing a coalition with neighboring towns to create a regional food hub." As they completed their circuit and returned to the farmhouse, James found himself torn between ingrained skepticism and reluctant interest. The ideas Alexandra outlined weren't completely novel. Agricultural extension services had promoted similar concepts for years, but the comprehensive approach and apparent funding behind her program were new. "What would be the first step?" he asked finally, careful to keep his tone neutral. "Hypothetically speaking," Alexandra's face lit up, though she quickly composed herself. "We would start with an assessment of your operation by our agricultural advisor, a former farmer himself who understands the practical realities, not just theoretical ideals. He'd work with you to identify the most impactful improvements. And we'd develop a tailored plan. The first phase would focus on stabilizing your situation, addressing any immediate financial or infrastructure concerns that threaten viability." End quote. James thought of the foreclosure notice. "And how long would this assessment take?" "We could have him out here next week," Alexandra replied promptly. "I've already spoken with him about your farm." "You seem pretty confident I'd agree," James observed, unable to keep a slight edge from his voice. Alexandra had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Not confident, hopeful. Your farm represents exactly the kind of operation our program was designed to support. When I saw it, even briefly during our first meeting, I recognized its potential." She paused, then added more softly, "And I enjoyed our conversation. You struck me as someone who would give an honest assessment of whether the program could actually work, not just tell me what I want to hear." The sound of school bus brakes squealing at the end of the driveway interrupted their conversation. James checked his watch with surprise. He'd lost track of time completely. "That's my daughter," he explained. "Listen, I need to think about all this. It sounds promising, but you've heard promising plans before that didn't pan out," Alexandra finished for him. "I understand completely." She reached into her portfolio and extracted a folder. "Here's detailed information about the program. Take your time reviewing it. My direct number is on the business card inside. Call me when you've decided, or if you have any questions." James accepted the folder with a nod, and they walked together toward the driveway where a young girl with dark blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail was hopping off the bus. "Dad!" she called, running toward them before stopping short at the sight of the unfamiliar visitor. "Oh, hello, Emma. This is Ms. Chen," James introduced her. "She's the new mayor of Riverdale." Emma's eyes widened. "The mayor? For real? We learned about mayors in social studies last year. You're in charge of the whole town?" Alexandra laughed warmly, extending her hand to the child. "That's right, though I have lots of help. It's very nice to meet you, Emma. Are you here about Dad's farm?" Emma asked, with the directness that only children can muster. "Is it good news?" "We could really use some good news." James felt a flush of embarrassment. "Emma, it's okay. Alexandra said gently. Then, to Emma, I'm here to talk about a program that might help farms like your dad's. Yes, but it's complicated grown-up stuff that your dad needs to think about carefully. Emma nodded seriously. Dad thinks about everything carefully. Sometimes too carefully, Mom says. Despite his discomfort, James couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his lips. Why don't you go start your homework, kiddo? I'll be in to help in a few minutes. After Emma had run inside, James turned to Alexandra. Sorry about that. Kids and filters, you know? No apology necessary, she assured him. She seems like a wonderful girl. They walked together to Alexandra's SUV in silence. As she opened the door, she turned to him once more. I meant what I said, James. Take your time considering this. But, she added, her expression earnest, I hope you'll at least talk to our agricultural advisor before making a final decision. I'll think about it, he promised, which was more than he usually offered to official proposals. As he watched her drive away, Emma called from the porch. Dad, was that really the mayor? What did she want? James looked down at the folder in his hands. She wants to help, she says. Then why do you look so worried? Emma asked as he joined her on the porch. Because, he said softly, ruffling her hair, help usually comes with strings attached. What kind of strings? James sighed, tucking the folder under his arm. That's what I need to figure out, sunshine. Now, how about that homework? Later that night, after Emma was asleep, James sat at the kitchen table with the folder open before him and a cup of coffee gone cold at his elbow. Lauren, just home from her diner shift, was reading through the materials with increasing interest. This actually looks legitimate, she said, examining a detailed breakdown of the funding sources. These are established grants, and that settlement with MidCorp made the regional news last month. She looked up at him. Why aren't you more excited about this? James ran a hand through his hair. Because it feels too good to be true. A random cyclist breaks down outside our farm, and 3 days later she shows up as the mayor with a program that could solve all our problems? That doesn't happen in real life. Lauren. Maybe not usually, she conceded. But that doesn't mean it can't happen once. And it's not like she created this program just for you according to these materials. They've been developing it for months. Still, he insisted stubbornly. There has to be an angle I'm not seeing. Lauren reached across the table and took his hand. The angle is that she's a new mayor, with an ambitious vision who needs successful showcase projects. If she can turn around struggling farms like ours, it validates her approach and builds political capital. She squeezed his fingers. That doesn't make it a bad deal for us, James. It could be win-win. He sighed heavily. I haven't told you something. Reluctantly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled foreclosure notice. This came 3 days ago. We have 90 days to catch up on payments, or we lose everything. Lauren paled as she read the notice, but to his surprise, she didn't break down or rage at him for keeping it secret. Instead, she looked back at the program materials with renewed intensity. Then we definitely need to consider this program, she said firmly. It specifically mentions emergency stabilization funds for farms at risk of foreclosure. Look, she pointed to a paragraph he'd somehow missed. They can provide bridge funding while the longer-term improvements are implemented. In exchange for what? James asked, the knot in his stomach tightening. Nothing comes free, Lauren. In exchange for participation in the program, following sustainable practices, hosting occasional demonstration events, and providing data, she read aloud. James, we'd be doing most of that anyway if we could afford to. Your grandfather was practicing sustainable farming before it had a name. It's how you always wanted to run this place. He couldn't argue with that. The industrial approach had never appealed to him, even before MidCorp started swallowing up neighboring farms and showing the environmental costs of such methods. I just don't want to give up control, he admitted finally. This farm has been ours, really ours, for generations. No shareholders, no corporate oversight, no government officials telling us what to plant and when. Lauren's expression softened. And in 90 days, it won't be ours at all unless something changes. She closed the folder and pushed it gently toward him. Just meet with the agricultural advisor, see what he has to say. We can always say no if it doesn't feel right. James nodded slowly, knowing she was right. They were out of alternatives, out of time, and though he hated to admit it out of the stubborn self-reliance that had defined Harlow farming for generations. Sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness. It was the only way forward. "I'll call her tomorrow," he agreed quietly. Lauren smiled and stood up, coming around the table to wrap her arms around his shoulders from behind. "That's all I'm asking." She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "Now, come to bed. The problems will still be there in the morning, but you'll face them better with some sleep." As he followed her upstairs, James glanced back at the folder on the table. A strange feeling stirred in his chest, not quite hope, but perhaps its cautious cousin, possibility. For the first time in months, tomorrow held something other than the grinding certainty of eventual failure. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, something was enough to build on. The next week passed in a blur of activity and emotion for James. True to her word, Alexandra had arranged for the agricultural advisor, a weathered former farmer named Ray Donnelly, with 30 years of experience, to visit the farm only 2 days after James called. Ray had spent a full day walking the property with James, asking questions not just about the crops and soil, but about the history of the farm, James's long-term vision, and the specific challenges he faced. Unlike the bank representatives and agricultural extension agents James had dealt with in the past, Ray spoke his language and understood the complex interplay of factors that made farming so precarious. "Your grandfather knew what he was doing," Ray had commented as they examined the soil in the apple orchard. "This soil's still healthy despite everything. That's a foundation we can build on." The word, "we," had caught James's attention, but he'd let it pass without comment. By the end of the day, he'd found himself surprisingly comfortable with Ray and cautiously optimistic about the assessment. 2 days later, Ray had returned with Alexandra and a detailed proposal that addressed both the immediate financial crisis and long-term sustainability. The emergency stabilization funds would cover the overdue mortgage payments, preventing foreclosure, while a combination of grants and low-interest loans would finance a modern drip irrigation system that would reduce water usage by up to 60%. The beauty of this approach, Alexandra had explained, is that the water savings translate directly to cost savings, which help you repay the loans, and with the new irrigation, you can expand your production of high-value crops, like the heritage apples and heirloom vegetables, that command premium prices in the markets we're developing." End quote. Now, a week after Alexandra's initial visit, James stood in his kitchen with Lauren and Emma, facing not just the mayor, but a small delegation that included Ray, a representative from the State University's Agricultural Extension Program, and the director of the newly established Riverdale Agricultural Cooperative. "Everything looks in order," the university representative was saying, sliding the final document across the table for James's signature. "Once signed, the funds will be released within 48 hours, and work can begin on the irrigation system next week." James read through the agreement one more time, though he practically knew it by heart at this point. The terms were more favorable than he'd dared hope. The emergency funds were structured as a forgivable loan that would convert to a grant if the farm remained in the program for 5 years. The irrigation improvements were funded 60% by grant money, with the CA remainder as a low-interest loan. And most importantly, the agreement explicitly protected the Harlow family's ownership and primary decision-making authority over the farm. "Go on, Dad," Emma encouraged, excitement evident in her voice. At 10 years old, she didn't fully understand the financial details, but she grasped that this agreement meant they would keep their home, and that her father wouldn't constantly wear that worried expression that had aged him beyond his years. James looked at Lauren, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Taking a deep breath, he signed his name on the final line, then slid the document back across the table. "Congratulations," Alexandra said warmly, standing to shake his hand. "You're officially the first farm in the Riverdale Agricultural Revitalization Program. I believe this is the beginning of a transformation not just for your farm, but for our entire community." As handshakes and congratulations were exchanged all around, James felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. The crushing weight of impending failure had lifted, replaced by something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: genuine hope for the future. "I've taken the liberty of arranging a small celebration," Alexandra announced as the formal business concluded. "Nothing elaborate, just a casual lunch to mark this milestone." On cue, Ray and the cooperative director began bringing in containers of food from a vehicle outside a spread of locally sourced dishes prepared by one of the restaurants participating in the farm-to-table breed initiative. As they all settled around the Harlow's large kitchen table, a family heirloom that had seen 4 generations of farmers gather around it, Alexandra raised her glass of local apple cider. "To new beginnings and old traditions," she toasted. "May this partnership help preserve what's valuable from the past while building a sustainable future." James raised his own glass, adding quietly, "And to unexpected help that arrives just when you need it most." Alexandra smiled at him, understanding passing between them. Somehow, a chance encounter on a dusty road had led to this momentous turning point, not just for his farm, but potentially for the entire agricultural community around Riverdale. As the meal progressed, the conversation flowed easily from immediate practical concerns to larger visions. The cooperative director outlined plans for a regional farmers market that would draw customers from surrounding towns, while the university representative described research opportunities that could bring additional funding and innovative techniques to participating farms. For the first time in years, James found himself thinking beyond mere survival, imagining possibilities for growth and improvement. Lauren caught his eye across the table and smiled, her expression a mix of relief and vindication. She had always believed there was a path forward, even when he had lost faith. As the gathering wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Alexandra pulled James aside for a private word on the front porch. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. James shook his head, confused. "I should be thanking you. You're the one who brought this program to my doorstep." "That's not what I mean," she clarified. "I'm thanking you for that day on the road, for helping a stranger with no expectation of reward. It reminded me why I got into public service in the first place." Jane shifted uncomfortably under her sincere gaze. "It was just a bike chain." "It was more than that," Alexandra insisted. "It was a moment of genuine connection in a world that increasingly lacks such moments. I'd been in meetings all week with officials and stakeholders who wanted something from me. Your simple kindness without agenda was refreshing." Before James could respond, Emma burst onto the porch. "Mayor Alexandra, Ray says you used to race bicycles professionally. Is that true?" Alexandra laughed, her formal demeanor softening instantly with the child. "Semi-professionally, for a few years in college, and just after. I was never quite good enough for the Olympic team, though I tried." Emma's eyes widened. "That's still amazing. I've been asking Dad for a bike for my birthday, but he says they're too expensive." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible. "Money's been tight, you know, Emma," James admonished gently, feeling heat rise to his face. Alexandra simply smiled. "Well, now that we're business partners of a sort, perhaps I could help with that. I have several bikes in storage that I've outgrown, including a very nice one that would be perfect for someone your age. It needs a bit of work, but nothing your dad couldn't handle." Emma looked ready to explode with excitement, turning to James with pleading eyes. "Dad? Could I? Please?" James hesitated, years of pride warring with his daughter's obvious joy. "That's very generous, but it's not charity," Alexandra interrupted, seeming to read his thoughts. "Consider it a long-term loan, an investment in the next generation of Riverdale cyclists. Besides," she added with a wink at Emma, "every farm needs good transportation options." James recognized defeat when he saw it, especially when Lauren appeared in the doorway behind Emma, her expression clearly communicating that he should accept this kindness for their daughter's sake. "That would be wonderful," he conceded. "Thank you. Excellent," Alexandra replied. "I'll drop it off next week when I come to check on the irrigation project." As the visitors finally departed with waves and promises of continued support, James stood on the porch with his family, watching the procession of vehicles disappear down the long driveway. "Well," Lauren said, slipping her arm around his waist, "that was unexpected." James nodded. still processing the whirlwind of changes that had descended upon them. Everything about the past week has been unexpected. Good unexpected, though, Emma insisted, leaning against her father's side. Right, Dad? Looking down at his daughter's hopeful face, then across at the fields that had seemed destined for corporate takeover just days ago, James felt something unfamiliar, yet unmistakable rising in his chest. Optimism. Yes, he agreed softly. Good unexpected. The summer heat gave way to autumn's crisp embrace as September rolled into October, bringing with it dramatic changes to Harlow Farm. The new irrigation system had been installed with remarkable efficiency, already demonstrating its worth by reducing water usage while improving crop health. The immediate financial crisis had been averted, with the bank foreclosure notice formally withdrawn after the emergency funds cleared. But the physical improvements were only part of the transformation. Under Ray Donnelly's guidance, James had begun transitioning portions of his acreage to higher-value specialty crops, including an expansion of the heritage apple orchard and the introduction of heirloom vegetable varieties that had disappeared from commercial farming decades ago. Most surprisingly to James, the farm had become a hub of activity. University researchers conducted soil studies and water efficiency measurements, documenting the impact of the new methods. Local school groups came for educational tours, with Emma proudly serving as a junior guide, explaining farming concepts to her peers with enthusiasm. Lauren had reduced her diner shifts from 5 days to 3, using her newfound time to manage the farm's new direct-to-consumer program, a weekly subscription service that delivered boxes of fresh produce to families in Riverdale and neighboring communities. To everyone's surprise, the program had reached capacity within 2 weeks of launching, with a growing wait list of interested customers. I still can't believe people are paying premium prices for our vegetables, James remarked one October morning, as he and Lauren packed boxes for delivery in the renovated barn that now served as their packing and distribution center. They're not just paying for vegetables, Lauren corrected him, carefully arranging multicolored heirloom carrots in a display-worthy configuration. They're paying for the story, the connection to the land, the knowledge that they're supporting sustainable local agriculture. She grinned at him. Alexandra was right about that part. People in the region were hungry for exactly what we're offering. They just needed a reliable way to access it. Alexandra had continued to be a regular presence at the farm, stopping by weekly to check on progress, offer suggestions, and occasionally simply to enjoy a quiet moment away from the pressures of her mayoral duties. To James's surprise, he had come to value these visits, finding in Alexandra not just a program administrator, but a genuine friend and thought partner. Today was to be a significant day, the first official meeting of all the farms participating in the Riverdale Agricultural Revitalization Program. In the 2 months since James had signed on as the inaugural farm, 7 other local operations had joined, each with their own specialties and challenges. The meeting was scheduled to take place at Harlow Farm, in the recently renovated barn that now featured a comfortable meeting space on the upper level. James had spent the early morning making sure everything was ready, feeling an unfamiliar sense of pride in the improvements that were visible throughout the property. "You're nervous," Lauren observed, as they finished the produce boxes and began preparing refreshments for the meeting. "Not nervous exactly," James countered, though his restless adjusting of chairs suggested otherwise. "Just want to make a good impression. These farmers are putting their trust in this program partly because we signed on first. I feel responsible." Lauren smiled and squeezed his arm. "They're coming because the program makes sense and because they've seen the changes here with their own eyes. No one's making decisions based solely on your endorsement." Before James could respond, Emma burst into the barn, breathless with excitement. "They're coming. I saw cars turning onto our road." Sure enough, within minutes, vehicles began arriving, practical pickups and SUVs much like James's own, carrying farmers from across the region. They filed into the barn with the cautious optimism particular to people who worked the land, hopeful, but prepared for disappointment, interested, but not given to excessive enthusiasm. Ray Donnelly arrived with Alexandra, who was dressed more casually than usual in jeans and a blazer, clearly making an effort to set a tone of approachable professionalism rather than bureaucratic formality. "Welcome, everyone," she greeted the assembled group once they had settled in with coffee and locally baked pastries. Thank you for coming to this first formal gathering of the Riverdale Agricultural Revitalization Program partners. I want to start by expressing my gratitude to James and Lauren Harlow for hosting us and for taking the initial leap of faith 2 months ago when this program existed only on paper." End quote. James nodded in acknowledgement, feeling unaccustomed warmth at the public recognition. Alexandra continued, outlining the program's progress to date, highlighting early successes and acknowledging challenges that had emerged. "The point of today's meeting," she explained, "is not just to share updates, but to establish this coalition as a self-directing body. While the town provides funding and framework, the long-term success of this initiative depends on it being farmer-led and farmer-governed. You all know your needs and challenges better than any outside expert or official." End quote. This approach clearly resonated with the group, and what had begun as a somewhat stiff, formal gathering gradually evolved into an engaged discussion about shared challenges, potential solutions, and opportunities for DAS. Collaboration. James found himself contributing more than he expected, sharing his experiences with the irrigation system and describing the surprisingly strong response to their direct marketing efforts. Other farmers offered their own insights. An older couple had developed efficient organic pest management techniques they were willing to share. A young farmer with technology expertise offered to help develop a shared online platform for the coalition. As the meeting progressed, James observed a palpable shift in the atmosphere. What had begun as a collection of individual, struggling operations was cohering into something with greater potential. A network of interconnected farms with complementary strengths and a shared vision. During a break, James stepped outside for some fresh air and found Alexandra already on the porch, gazing out at the field where the newly irrigated winter wheat was emerging in perfect rows of vibrant green. "This is going better than I expected," she commented as he joined her at the railing. "The farmers or the crops?" he asked with a small smile. "Both," she replied. "But I was referring to the meeting. Farmers aren't typically known for embracing collective approaches or government programs." James leaned against the porch rail. "We're stubborn, not stupid. When something makes sense and respects our autonomy, we can recognize it." He paused, then added, "You designed this program well. It addresses real needs without trying to turn us into something we're not." "That was intentional," Alexandra acknowledged. "Too many agricultural initiatives fail because they're designed by people who've never actually farmed, or they're so rigid they can't adapt to local conditions." She turned to face him directly. "I wanted to create a framework that empowers rather than dictates." "It's working," James assured her. "At least for us. 2 months ago, I was facing foreclosure and trying to figure out how to tell Emma we might lose her home. Now," he gestured to the flourishing fields, the renovated barn, the gathering of engaged farmers inside. "Now there's a future here. Not just survival, but growth." Alexandra smiled, genuine pleasure lighting her features. "That's exactly what I hoped to hear. But," she added with characteristic directness, "the program's still in its infancy. The real test will come next season when more farms are involved, and we face whatever new challenges arise." "Always the pragmatist," James observed. "Says the man who questioned my motives at every turn for the first week," she countered with a raised eyebrow. James had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Fair point. I guess we're both cautious by nature. Which is why this works," Alexandra noted. "We balance each other's perspectives." The barn door opened, and Ray stuck his head out. "We're ready to continue whenever you are. The Johnson Farm irrigation proposal is up next." "We'll be right in," Alexandra assured him. As Ray disappeared back inside, she turned to James once more. "Before we go back, I wanted to let you know that the bike for Emma is in my car. I had it refurbished, properly new chain, new brake cables, everything safety checked." "You didn't have to do that," James said, though he felt a surge of gratitude at her thoughtfulness. "I know," she replied simply. "I wanted to. She's a special kid, and this farm is a special place. Sometimes it's nice to do things just because they bring joy." As they rejoined the meeting, James found himself reflecting on how dramatically his perspective had shifted in just 2 months. The mayor, who had once represented an unknown, potentially threatening official entity, had become not just an ally, but a friend whose vision aligned remarkably with his own long-buried hopes for his farm. The remainder of the meeting focused on practical next steps: a shared equipment program that would allow farms to access expensive machinery they couldn't individually afford, a cooperative marketing initiative that would establish a unified brand for the region's sustainably grown products, and a schedule of educational events that would raise public awareness while creating additional revenue streams for participating farms. By the time the farmers departed in the late afternoon, there was a sense of momentum and shared purpose that James hadn't experienced in his agricultural community for many years. The isolation that had characterized his struggle against corporate pressure and environmental challenges had been replaced by a network of support and collaboration. After the last vehicle had disappeared down the driveway, Alexandra helped James and Lauren clean up the meeting space, chatting easily about the day's discussions and next steps. When they had finished, she retrieved a gleaming bicycle from her SUV, a perfectly sized mountain bike, painted a vibrant blue with new tires, comfortable grips, and a small basket mounted on the front. "Now," she said, as James wheeled it toward the house, "where's the lucky recipient?" Emma, who had been watching from the window, flew out the front door with a squeal of delight that made all three adults laugh. Her reaction upon seeing the bike wide-eyed disbelief, followed by exuberant gratitude, was everything Alexandra could have hoped for. "Can I try it now? Please?" Emma begged, already running her hands reverently over the handlebars. "Of course," Alexandra encouraged. "That's what bikes are for, to be ridden." As Emma pedaled experimental circles in the driveway, her face alight with joy, James felt a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for this unexpected gift, pride in his daughter's uninhibited happiness, and something deeper he couldn't immediately identify. "Thank you," Lauren said softly to Alexandra, watching her daughter with misty eyes. "It's been a while since we've been able to give her something that made her this happy." "She deserves it," Alexandra replied. "You all do. The past few years have been unimaginably difficult for small farmers, and yet you've persisted." She turned to James. "That kind of resilience should be rewarded, not punished by systems that favor only the largest operations." James nodded, finally identifying the unfamiliar emotion that had been growing within him. Hope, yes, but also a reawakening of purpose. For too long, he had been merely surviving, focused on holding on to what remained rather than building something new. Alexandra's program, with its blend of practical support and visionary goals, had rekindled his belief in the future of small-scale, sustainable agriculture. "I keep thinking about something my grandfather used to say," he told Alexandra as they watched Emma master turning corners on her new bike. "Farming isn't just about growing crops, it's about growing community." "Wise man," Alexandra commented. "He was," James agreed. "I think you would have appreciated what you're trying to build here." Alexandra's expression turned thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being naive, thinking we can create an alternative to the industrial model that's dominated for decades. The economic forces arrayed against small farms are powerful." "Maybe," James acknowledged. "But you're not doing it alone anymore. 2 months ago, it was just you with a vision and a folder full of plans. Now there's a coalition of farms, university partnerships, community support." He gestured toward Emma, now confidently circling the driveway. "And a new generation getting connected to local agriculture." Alexandra smiled, visibly heartened by his perspective. "You've come a long way from the skeptic who questioned every aspect of the program." "I still question things," James pointed out. "But now I do it constructively, as a partner rather than an adversary. That's exactly the kind of engagement we need," she affirmed. "Blind faith doesn't build sustainable systems. Thoughtful critique and continuous improvement do." As the autumn afternoon began to fade toward evening, Alexandra prepared to depart, promising to return the following week for the scheduled visit from state agricultural officials who were interested in potentially replicating the program elsewhere. "Consider having Emma demonstrate her bike riding skills," she suggested with a smile. "Nothing sells an agricultural revitalization program like a happy kid enjoying the benefits." After a round of goodbyes, with Emma insisting on riding her bike alongside Alexandra's SUV to the end of the driveway, James and Lauren stood arm in arm on the porch, watching the vehicle disappear around the parade bend. "I never thought I'd say this," Lauren mused, "but I actually believe we're going to be okay." James pulled her closer, resting his chin on top of her head. "More than okay, I think. For the first time in years, I'm excited about what we're building here." He paused, then added softly, "Thank you for not letting me give up." Lauren looked up at him with a smile. "I never had a doubt. Stubborn determination is a Harlow family trait after all." As they turned to go inside, Emma came pedaling back up the driveway, cheeks flushed with exhilaration and the crisp October air. "Dad! Mom! This is the best day ever," she declared, skidding to a practice stop beside them. "When can I help with deliveries?" Mayor Alexandra said, "Maybe I could help deliver veggies on my bike to neighbors in town." James laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "We'll see, sunshine. For now, let's get dinner started, and you can tell us all about your cycling adventures." As they entered the farmhouse together, a home that no longer faced imminent loss, James felt a profound sense of gratitude for the chance encounter that had brought Alexandra Chen into their lives. A simple bike chain repair had somehow led to a transformation not just of his farm, but of the entire agricultural community. Some might call it luck or coincidence, but James preferred to see it as something more meaningful, a reminder that even in the most challenging times, unexpected connections could lead to extraordinary opportunities. All it took was the willingness to help a stranger on a dusty road, and the courage to accept help when it was offered in return. Winter descended on Riverdale with unexpected gentleness that year, bringing adequate snow to insulate the winter crops without the devastating ice storms that had plagued recent seasons. For the first time in years, James approached the coldest months without dread, secure in the knowledge that the farm's finances were stable enough to weather the natural lull in production. The Harlow farm had undergone remarkable changes in the 3 months since joining Alexandra's program. The irrigation system had been fully installed before the first frost, promising significant water conservation when spring planting began. The barn renovation was complete, creating not just a produce packing facility, but a small farm store that opened on weekends, drawing a steady stream of customers from Riverdale and beyond. Most significantly, James had hired back his 2 former farmhands full-time and added a part-time position that was filled by a local community college student studying sustainable agriculture. The farm was no longer just a struggling family operation, but a growing business and educational resource for the region. December brought the first major public event of the revitalization program, a holiday farm market featuring products from all 8 participating farms, hosted in Riverdale's community center. James had initially been skeptical about the timing, assuming that winter would be the least appealing season for an agricultural showcase. But Alexandra had insisted that the holiday period offered unique marketing opportunities. "People care more about where their food comes from during the holidays," she had explained. "They're cooking special meals, hosting family gatherings, and generally more conscious about quality and provenance. Plus, local food products make excellent gifts." As usual, her assessment proved accurate. The market attracted several hundred visitors despite snowy conditions, with customers eagerly purchasing everything from Harlow Farms apple preserves to aged cheeses from the Davies Dairy, honey from the Rodriguez Apiary, and handcrafted wool products from the Peterson Sheep Farm. James and Lauren had brought Emma along to help at their booth, and she'd proven to be their secret weapon, charming customers with her enthusiastic descriptions of farm life and her now expert knowledge of heritage apple varieties. By mid-afternoon, they had sold out of nearly everything they'd brought. "I told you it would work," Alexandra said, appearing at their booth during a brief lull. As mayor, she had been circulating throughout the event, but she'd made a point of stopping at each farm's booth to check in and offer encouragement. "You were right," James acknowledged, having long since grown comfortable with admitting when her predictions proved accurate. "I wouldn't have thought people would drive through snow for farm products in December, but here we are. People are hungry for connection," Alexandra observed, watching the bustling market around them. Not just to each other, but to the land, to the sources of their food, to something authentic in an increasingly artificial world. Lauren nodded in agreement. We've noticed that at the farm store too. Customers don't just come for the products, they come to talk, to ask questions, to see where their food is grown. Exactly, Alexandra said. That's the intangible value of what we're building, not just sustainable agriculture, but sustainable community. Emma tugged at her father's sleeve. Dad, can I go look at the honey booth? Mrs. Rodriguez said she'd show me how the extractor works. Sure, sunshine, James agreed. Just stay where we can see you. As Emma darted off, Alexandra turned back to James and Lauren with a more serious expression. I wanted to let you know that the State Agricultural Department has officially approved funding to expand our program next year. They were extremely impressed with the data from the first quarter, particularly the water conservation metrics from your irrigation system. End quote. That's fantastic news, Lauren exclaimed. How many more farms will be able to join? At least 12, Alexandra replied. And we'll be able to offer more comprehensive support to those already participating. She glanced at James. Including that soil rehabilitation project for your North Field that the university researchers recommended. James felt a surge of excitement. The North Field had been essentially abandoned for the past 3 years due to soil depletion after decades of conventional farming methods. The prospect of reclaiming that acreage would significantly expand their productive capacity. That would be... He searched for words adequate to the opportunity. Transformative. There's more, Alexandra continued. The regional food hub concept we discussed is moving forward ahead of schedule. We've secured an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town that will be renovated to serve as a permanent indoor farmers market, processing facility, and distribution center. End quote. Lauren's eyes widened. That's the piece we've been missing, a consistent year-round outlet for products and a central location for the community to connect with local farms. Exactly, Alexandra confirmed. Construction will begin in February, with a target opening date in May-June, in time for the spring harvest. James shook his head in wonderment. When you showed up at our farm with that folder of plans, I never imagined how quickly things would develop. I thought it would be years of incremental progress, not months of transformation. Alexandra smiled. I've found that once you create the right conditions and bring the right people together, change can happen remarkably quickly. The elements were all here. Skilled farmers, fertile land, community interest in local food, available funding sources. They just needed a catalyst to bring them together in the right configuration. You were that catalyst, Lauren said with frank admiration. Your vision made this possible. Alexandra shook her head modestly. I just provided the framework. It's the farming community that's making it work through daily effort and expertise. James recognized in her response the same instinct he often felt, a discomfort with direct praise, the reflexive redirection of credit. It was a trait common among people who work with the land, where success always depended on factors beyond any individual's control or contribution. How about we agree that it's a genuine collaboration, he suggested, with credit enough to go around. Alexandra laughed. Diplomatically put. Speaking of collaboration, I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to host a special visitor next week. The governor's agricultural advisor is interested in seeing our program firsthand, and your farm offers the most compelling demonstration of the results so far. End quote. James raised an eyebrow. The governor's office? That's a significant step up from local officials. It's a natural progression, Alexandra explained. Word is spreading about what we're building here, and state-level administration is taking notice. If the governor adopts elements of our approach in her agricultural policy, it could benefit farming communities across the state. The idea that their local initiative might influence state policy was both exciting and slightly intimidating. 3 months ago, James had been focusing exclusively on survival. Now he was being asked to help showcase a model that could potentially transform agricultural practices well beyond Riverdale. Of course we'll host the visit, Lauren answered for both of them. Just let us know what they'll want to see and when they're coming. Wonderful, Alexandra said with evident relief. I'll coordinate with their office and get you the details by Monday. As Alexandra moved on to check in with other farm booths, Lauren turned to James with a knowing smile. Remember when you were convinced this program was too good to be true? James chuckled, acknowledging the accuracy of her reminder. I was certain there was a hidden agenda or an impossible catch. And now we're hosting the governor's agricultural advisor to showcase our success story, Lauren pointed out. Sometimes good things really do happen without catastrophic strings attached. Apparently so, James agreed, surveying the busy market around them, tangible evidence of the community's renewed engagement with local agriculture. Though I still find it hard to believe how much has changed from one random encounter with a cyclist with a broken chain. Lauren squeezed his hand. Maybe it wasn't so random. Maybe it was exactly what was supposed to happen, exactly when it needed to happen. James wasn't generally inclined towards such philosophical perspectives, preferring to focus on concrete realities rather than cosmic patterns. But he had to admit, there was something almost poetic about the sequence of events that had transformed their circumstances so dramatically. Maybe, he conceded. Or maybe it's simply that when people of goodwill work together toward a common goal, remarkable things become possible. Lauren smiled. I like that interpretation too. Either way, I'm grateful. As the market began winding down in the late afternoon, James found himself helping Alexandra load unsold items from various booths into her SUV for donation to the local food bank, another component of the program that ensured no food went to waste while they addressing community food security needs. You seem preoccupied, she observed as they worked. Having second thoughts about hosting the governor's advisor? James shook his head. Not at all. I was just thinking about how different things were 3 months ago, and how close we came to losing everything. Alexandra nodded understandingly. It's a stark contrast, I imagine. More than you know, James said quietly, then made a decision to share something he hadn't told her before. The day you found me on the road with your broken bike, the foreclosure notice had arrived that morning. I had exactly 90 days to somehow come up with funds I didn't have, or lose the farm that had been in my family for 4 generations. Alexandra stopped loading boxes, turning to face him with surprise. You never told me it was that dire. Pride, James admitted. Even when you came back with the program proposal, I didn't want to seem desperate, didn't want to be a charity case. Yet you agreed to participate despite your reservations, she noted. Lauren convinced me, he acknowledged with a small smile. She recognized the opportunity for what it was, while I was still looking for hidden traps. Alexandra resumed loading boxes, a thoughtful expression on her face. I'm glad you took that leap of faith, despite your doubts. Your farm has become the cornerstone of the entire program, the proof that our approach can work not just in theory, but in practice. And I'm glad you didn't give up on me despite my initial skepticism, James replied. Not everyone would have persisted in the face of such resistance. Alexandra smiled. I recognize something in you, that first stubborn integrity, that I knew would be an asset to the program once you were convinced of its value. Some people are easy to win over, but equally quick to abandon ship when challenges arise. You're the opposite, difficult to convince, but steadfast once committed. End quote. Her assessment was accurate enough that James felt simultaneously exposed and understood. My grandfather would have called it mule-headedness, he said with a self-deprecating smile. A quality that served farmers well for generations, Alexandra countered. Persistence in the face of adversity is exactly what sustainable agriculture requires. As they finished loading the donations, the early winter darkness was settling over Riverdale, transforming the town square into a scene from a holiday postcard with its twinkling lights and snow-dusted buildings. The community center where the market had been held glowed warmly as the last vendors packed their displays and chatted among themselves, sharing stories of customer interactions and sales successes. This is what success looks like, Alexandra said softly, gesturing toward the diverse group of farmers who had once been isolated in their individual struggles, but were now a cohesive community of mutual support. Not just financial stability, though that's essential, but renewed connections and shared purpose. James nodded in agreement, experiencing a profound sense of gratitude for this unexpected second chance, not just for his farm, but for the entire agricultural community that defined the region's identity and heritage. Ready to head home? Lauren called, approaching with Emma, who was chatting animatedly with the daughter of another participating farmer, a new friendship that had blossomed through their shared experiences in the program. "More than ready," James confirmed. "I think we have cause for celebration tonight. Hot chocolate with all the trimmings?" Emma's eyes lit up. "With the peppermint sticks? And whipped cream?" "The works," James promised, delighting in his ability to offer this simple pleasure without the shadow of financial worry that had tainted even small indulgences in recent years. As they said their goodbyes to Alexandra and headed for their truck, James found himself reflecting on the curious path that had led them here, from the brink of losing everything to the forefront of an agricultural renaissance that was gaining attention beyond their small community. The future still held challenges, of course. Sustainable farming would never be without risks and uncertainties. But for the first time in years, those challenges seemed manageable, even invigorating rather than overwhelming. They were building something with meaning and purpose, something that connected them to the land, to their community, and to a vision of agriculture that honored tradition while embracing innovation. All because he had stopped to help a cyclist with a broken chain on a dusty road beside his failing fields. Sometimes, James reflected, as they drove home through the gently falling snow, the smallest acts of kindness opened doors to possibilities beyond imagination. And sometimes, the help you offered to others returned to you when you needed it most, in ways you never could have anticipated. Spring arrived in Riverdale with a vibrant energy that seemed to mirror the transformation of the agricultural community. The once struggling farms participating in Alexandra's program were now showcases of sustainable practices, drawing visitors from across the state and beyond. Harlow Farm had emerged as the flagship operation, its remarkable turnaround serving as powerful testament to the program's potential. The Northfield, long abandoned due to soil depletion, was now undergoing intensive rehabilitation using innovative methods developed by the university research partners. Cover crops grew in emerald waves, gradually restoring nutrients and structure to soil that had been damaged by years of conventional practices. The heritage apple orchard had been expanded to include 20 new trees of rare varieties, creating what agricultural historians were beginning to recognize as one of the most diverse collections in the region. Emma had taken particular interest in this project, dedicating her school science fair project to documenting the distinct characteristics of each variety and winning first place for her detailed presentation. Most visible of all changes was the new farm store and education center that had replaced an old storage shed near the entrance to the property. Designed to blend traditional agricultural aesthetics with modern efficiency, the timber frame structure featured solar panels, rainwater collection systems, and large windows that flooded the interior with natural light. On weekends, it bustled with customers purchasing fresh produce, value-added products, and educational materials about sustainable farming practices. James still marveled at the transformation whenever he took a moment to step back and observe what they had built. The farm that had been weeks away from foreclosure was now not only financially stable, but thriving, employing 5 people full-time and serving as an educational resource for the community. Today marked a significant milestone in the program's development: the grand opening of the Riverdale Agricultural Hub, the renovated warehouse that would serve as a permanent home for the farmers market, and a distribution center for regional restaurants and grocers seeking locally grown products. James and Lauren had arrived early to help with final preparations, bringing with them a truckload of early spring produce and preserved goods from the winter months. Emma had come along, excited to be part of the historic occasion and eager to show off her new role as a junior docent for the educational displays about local agricultural history. "Can you believe this place?" Lauren marveled as they entered the transformed warehouse. What had been a derelict industrial space 6 months earlier was now a soaring, light-filled marketplace with polished concrete floors, exposed wooden beams, and clear signage directing visitors to different sections: produce, dairy, meat, value-added products, and an educational area with interactive displays about sustainable farming methods. "Alexandra doesn't do anything halfway," James observed, setting down a crate of early greens at their assigned booth. "When she has a vision, she makes it happen." As if summoned by her name, Alexandra appeared from the administrative offices at the back of the building, dressed more formally than usual in a tailored suit that reflected the significance of the day. Despite the mayor's polished appearance, James noted the slight shadows under her eyes that suggested she had been working around the clock to ensure today's launch would be successful. "There you are," she greeted them warmly. "Everything looks amazing. Your display is going to be a centerpiece. We brought everything you requested," Lauren assured her. Plus some additional items Emma insisted would enhance the visual appeal, her exact words. She smiled fondly at their daughter, who was already arranging jars of preserves in a color-coordinated pattern that was indeed visually striking. "She has a good eye," Alexandra approved, before lowering her voice slightly. "Just wanted to give you a heads up, there will be some special visitors today. The governor confirmed last night that she'll be stopping by the opening." James raised his eyebrows in surprise. "The governor herself? I thought maybe a representative, but not actually her." Alexandra nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy evident in her expression. "Apparently, our little agricultural experiment has caught attention at the highest levels of state government. The data from the first 6 months is compelling enough that they're considering using our model as a template for a statewide initiative." The implications of this development were significant. What had begun as a local program aimed at saving individual farms could potentially scale to impact agricultural communities across the entire state, affecting thousands of farmers and countless consumers. "That's incredible," Lauren said softly. "Think of how many farms could be saved, how many communities revitalized." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," James cautioned, though he too felt a surge of excitement at the possibility. "One step at a time. Today is about showcasing what we've built here, making sure this hub launches successfully." "Always the pragmatist," Alexandra teased gently. "But you're right, of course. Today's success is the foundation for everything that might follow." She glanced at her watch. "I need to check on a few more things before we open the doors. The press will be arriving in about 30 minutes for a preview tour." As Alexandra hurried off to continue her preparations, Lauren looked at James with a knowing smile. "You're proud of all this, aren't you? Even though you'd never say it outright." James surveyed the bustling space, watching as other farmers arranged their booths, community volunteers positioned signage, and the entire ecosystem they had collectively built came to life around them. "I am," he admitted quietly. "Not just of what we've done at our farm, but of this entire community coming together. 6 months ago, we were all isolated, each fighting our own losing battles against forces that seemed unstoppable. Now, he gestured around them at the vibrant hub of activity. Now we're building something meaningful together." Lauren squeezed his arm gently. "And to think you almost didn't stop to help that cyclist with her broken chain." James chuckled. "Don't remind me. I actually considered pretending I hadn't seen her." "But you didn't," Lauren pointed out, "because despite all your grumbling and skepticism, you've always been the kind of person who stops to help. It's who you are." Before James could respond, Emma rushed back to their booth. "Everything's perfect now. Can I go check out the education area? Mrs. Peterson said they have interactive screens about soil science." "Go ahead," Lauren agreed. "But be back here before the doors open to the public. We'll need your help with customers." As Emma darted away, her excitement palpable, James began methodically unpacking their remaining products, arranging them with the care that came from genuine pride in what they had produced. Each item, from jars of apple butter to bags of specialty flour ground from heritage wheat, represented not just agricultural output, but a piece of their family's legacy, preserved and reimagined for a new era. By the time the doors opened to the public at 10 o'clock, the Riverdale Agricultural Hub was a hive of energy and anticipation. Local television crews positioned cameras at strategic locations. Reporters interviewed Alexandra and various farmers about the BA initiative, and a steady stream of curious visitors began flowing through the entrance. To everyone's surprise, the turnout exceeded even Alexandra's optimistic projections. By noon, the aisles were comfortably crowded with people of all ages, families with children eager to participate in the kid-friendly educational activities, elderly residents reconnecting with the kind of local food basha systems they remembered from their youth, and younger adults passionate about sustainable living and supporting local businesses. The Harlow Farm booth quickly became one of the most popular, thanks in part to Emma's enthusiastic descriptions of their growing practices and Lauren's knack for suggesting creative uses for their products. James found himself repeatedly explaining the Heritage Apple program to interested customers, many of whom signed up for the Orchard Tour program they had recently launched. During a brief lull, Ray Donnelly appeared at their booth, his weathered face creased in a satisfied smile. "You Harlows are the stars of the show today," he commented. "Your booth has had the steadiest traffic all morning." "People are curious about the turnaround story," James replied modestly. "They've heard about the farm that was about to go under and is now expanding instead." Ray shook his head. "It's more than that. You've become the proof that this entire concept can work. That small-scale, sustainable agriculture isn't just an idealistic dream, but a viable economic model. That matters to people around here who've watched their communities hollowed out by corporate consolidation." Before James could respond, a stir near the main entrance caught their attention. Alexandra was greeting a group of formally dressed individuals, including a woman James recognized immediately as Governor Wilson. The official entourage moved slowly through the market, stopping at various booths for brief conversations and photo opportunities. "Looks like we'll be getting a visit from the highest levels of state government," Ray observed. "Just be yourself. Your story is compelling enough, without embellishment." Sure enough, the gubernatorial procession eventually made its way to the Harlow farm booth. Alexandra performed introductions with practiced ease. "Governor Wilson, this is James and Lauren Harlow, whose farm was the first to join our revitalization program. And this is their daughter Emma, who has become something of an agricultural ambassador in her own right." The governor, a practical woman in her 50s with a reputation for no-nonsense effectiveness, extended her hand first to James, then to Lauren and Emma. "I've heard a great deal about your operation, Mr. Harlow. Mayor Chen speaks very highly of what you've accomplished in a short time." "We've had exceptional support," James replied, feeling uncharacteristically nervous under the scrutiny of state officials and accompanying press cameras. "The program Mayor Chen designed addresses real needs with, quote, practical solutions." "So I've gathered," the governor said with an appraising look around the bustling market. "The data from your first 6 months is impressive. Increased productivity with decreased resource usage, job creation in a sector that had been losing positions for decades, improved community food security. These are outcomes that align perfectly with our state's agricultural priorities." Alexandra stepped forward slightly. "The Harlow farm has implemented the full spectrum of our program components, from water conservation technology to market development strategies. They've seen a 40% reduction in water usage, while increasing productive acreage by 25%. And the Heritage Apple Orchard Preservation Project has been recognized by the State Historical Agricultural Society," Lauren added. "We're working to save varieties that might otherwise be lost entirely." The governor nodded appreciatively. "Preserving agricultural biodiversity while improving economic viability. That's exactly the kind of multifaceted approach we need." She turned her attention to Emma. "And I understand you're involved in the educational component?" Emma straightened, her initial shyness giving way to enthusiasm for her favorite subject. "Yes, Governor. I give tours to school groups and help explain how sustainable farming works. My science fair project on heritage apple varieties won first place, and now I'm studying soil microbiomes." A genuine smile warmed the governor's typically reserved expression. "Impressive. We need more young people engaged with agriculture if we're going to secure its future." She turned back to James and Lauren. "Would you be willing to host a visit from my full agricultural advisory committee next month? They're developing recommendations for a potential statewide initiative based on Mayor Chen's model, and seeing your operation firsthand would be invaluable." James glanced at Lauren, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd be honored," he replied. "Our farm is open to anyone interested in sustainable agricultural practices." "Excellent," the governor said, clearly pleased. "My office will coordinate with Mayor Chen on the details." She paused, then added with surprising candor, "What you're building here matters, Mr. Harlow, not just for Riverdale but potentially for agricultural communities across the state. Success stories like yours provide the evidence we need to shift policy and resource allocation in more sustainable directions." After a few more minutes of conversation and the inevitable photo opportunity, the gubernatorial entourage moved on to the next booth. James exhaled slowly, only then realizing he'd been holding tension in his shoulders throughout the exchange. "You did great," Warren assured him, squeezing his hand. "Natural and authentic, just like Ray suggested." "I'm not used to being a poster child for agricultural policy," James admitted. "Give me a broken tractor to fix any day over talking to politicians and cameras." "But you're good at it," Emma insisted. "You tell the truth, and people can see that." Her simple assessment touched James deeply. Of all the values he hoped to instill in his daughter, honesty and integrity ranked highest. That she recognized and valued these qualities in him meant more than any official recognition or publicity. The remainder of the opening day passed in a blur of conversations, sales, and community connections. By closing time, the Harlow booth had sold out of almost everything they brought, and James had collected contact information from several restaurants interested in featuring their products on farm-to-table menus. As vendors began packing up their remaining items, Alexandra approached their booth once more, fatigue evident in her posture, but satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "We did it," she said simply. "Twice the projected attendance, media coverage beyond anything we anticipated, and the governor's endorsement. I couldn't have asked for a better launch." "You should be proud," James told her sincerely. "This is your vision coming to life." Alexandra shook her head. "It's our collective vision now. I may have initiated the program, but it's the participating farms that have given it substance and demonstrated its viability." She lowered her voice slightly. "The governor's chief of staff pulled me aside before they left. They're serious about scaling this model statewide. They're talking about significant funding allocations in next year's budget." Lauren's eyes widened. "That could transform rural economies across the state." "Exactly," Alexandra confirmed. "But they need compelling evidence and visible success stories. That's why the committee visit to your farm next month is so important. They need to see not just data, but tangible results: healthy fields, functioning systems, economic viability." "No pressure," James quipped, though he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Alexandra smiled apologetically. "I know it's a lot, but if anyone can show them what's possible, it's you, Harlows. Your farm embodies everything. This program is about honoring agricultural traditions while embracing innovative approaches that ensure sustainability for the future." As they finished packing up and prepared to leave the market, James found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past 6 months. The farm that had been weeks away from foreclosure was now not only secure, but thriving, expanding its operations and serving as a model for agricultural revitalization. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness, stopping to help a stranded cyclist on a dusty road. "Penny for your thoughts," Lauren said as they loaded the last empty containers into their truck. James smiled. "Just thinking about bike chains." Lauren laughed softly, understanding immediately. The universe works in mysterious ways. "Or maybe not so mysterious," James countered. "Maybe it's simply that when people approach each other with genuine goodwill, unexpected connections form and new possibilities emerge." "Either way," Lauren said, slipping her arm through his, "I'm grateful for broken bike chains and stubborn mayors with vision." "Me too," James agreed quietly. "More than I can express." As they drove home through the greening countryside, the Harlow farm visible in the distance with its newly installed solar panels glinting in the late afternoon sun, James felt a profound sense of rightness as, if all the struggles and near failures of recent years had been leading to this moment, this renewal, this opportunity to build something that mattered not just for his family, but for the entire community. The road ahead would still hold challenges, of course. Sustainable agriculture would always face pressures from industrial competitors, climate uncertainties, and market fluctuations. But now they face those challenges, not in isolation but as part of a resilient network of mutual support and shared purpose. All because he had stopped to fix a broken bike chain for a stranger who turned out to be exactly the ally they needed. Exactly when they needed her most. 1 year to the day after Alexandra had first appeared on his farm with her broken bike chain, James stood in the center of his flourishing north field. Surrounded by hip-high cover crops that swayed gently in the June breeze, the soil beneath his feet once depleted and lifeless now teemed with microorganisms. its structure and fertility gradually restored through carefully designed regenerative practices. The transformation of this particular field symbolized the broader renaissance of Heartwarming Farm and the entire Riverdale agricultural community. What had seemed a hopeless situation 12 months earlier had become a showcase of sustainable agriculture's potential, economically viable, environmentally responsible, and deeply connected to the community it served. The farm's financial situation had stabilized completely, with diverse revenue streams from direct market sales, restaurant contracts, educational programs, and value-added products providing resilience against the fluctuations that had previously threatened their survival. Lauren had left her diner job entirely, now managing the farm's marketing and community engagement full-time, with evident satisfaction in this new role. Emma, who had just completed 5th grade with honors, had blossomed in parallel with the farm's revival. Her natural curiosity and enthusiasm had found focus in agricultural science and environmental studies. Supported by the university researchers who had become regular presences on the farm and had begun to treat her as a junior colleague rather than just a farmer's child. Most importantly, the isolation and desperation that had characterized the previous years had been replaced by a sense of purpose and belonging within a revitalized agricultural community. The Riverdale Agricultural Hub had become not just a marketplace, but a gathering place where farmers shared knowledge, supported each other through challenges, and collectively built something larger than any could have created individually. Today marked another milestone in the program's development: the official launch of the state's Rural Agricultural Sustainability Initiative, directly modeled on Alexandra's Riverdale program and funded with a substantial allocation from the state budget. Governor Wilson herself would be arriving within the hour for the announcement ceremony, to be held at Harlow Farm as the flagship operation that had demonstrated the model's potential. As James surveyed the preparations, the podium positioned at the edge of the Heritage Apple Orchard, rows of chairs for invited guests and press, displays highlighting the farm's innovative practices. He felt a complex mixture of pride, gratitude, and lingering amazement at how dramatically circumstances had changed. "Everything looks perfect," Alexandra said, appearing beside him in the field. As mayor, she had been deeply involved in planning today's event, coordinating between state officials, local participants, and media representatives to ensure the ceremony effectively communicated the program's significance. "Thanks to your team's efforts," James acknowledged. "They've been setting up since dawn." Alexandra smiled. "It's worth the effort. Today isn't just about launching a new state initiative, it's about celebrating what this community has already accomplished and the blueprint you've created for others to follow." James nodded, still sometimes uncomfortable with the public attention their farm had received, but recognizing its value in advancing the broader mission of agricultural sustainability. "A year ago, I wouldn't have believed any of this was possible. I was just trying to hold on to the land, keep the bank at bay for one more season. And now, you're hosting the governor at a ceremony that will potentially transform agriculture across the state," Alexandra observed. "It's quite a journey." "One that started with a broken bike chain," James reminded her with a small smile. Alexandra laughed softly. "Sometimes I wonder if my chain hadn't broken precisely there, beside your specific field. Would any of this have happened? Was it just random chance, or something more meaningful?" "I've thought about that too," James admitted, "but I've concluded it doesn't really matter. What matters is that when opportunity appeared in whatever form we both chose to engage with it constructively. You could have been just another entitled cyclist annoyed at the inconvenience. I could have been just another suspicious farmer unwilling to help a stranger. Instead, we each saw something in the other worth connecting with." Alexandra finished his thought. "A basic human recognition that transcended our different circumstances." "Exactly," James agreed. "And that connection created possibilities neither of us could have created alone." Their philosophical moment was interrupted by Lauren calling from the farmhouse porch. "They're coming up the road. The governor's motorcade just turned onto our driveway." "Showtime," Alexandra said with a quick breath. "Are you ready for this?" James nodded, surprisingly calm despite the high-profile nature of the event. As ready as I'll ever be. Together they walked back toward the ceremonial area, where guests were already taking their seats, a diverse gathering that included participating farmers, local officials, state representatives, university partners, and community members who had supported the program's development. Emma stood proudly at the entrance to the seating area, dressed in her best clothes but with practical boots that reflected her daily involvement in farm operations. She had insisted on greeting guests personally, handling the responsibility with a poise that continually surprised and impressed her parents. The gubernatorial motorcade arrived with minimal fanfare, reflecting Governor Wilson's practical approach to her office. She emerged from the lead vehicle accompanied by her agricultural advisor and chief of staff, immediately walking over to greet James, Lauren, and Emma with crass, genuine warmth. "The farm looks magnificent," she commented, surveying the vibrant fields and orchard beyond the ceremonial area. "Even more impressive than during my visit to the market 6 months ago." "We've been blessed with good growing conditions this season," James replied, instinctively deflecting credit toward natural factors rather than claiming it for himself, a farmer's habitual humility. The governor smiled knowingly. "Weather helps, certainly, but what you've built here goes far beyond favorable rainfall patterns, Mr. Harlow. The techniques you've implemented, the systems you've developed, these create resilience regardless of conditions." Lauren stepped forward slightly. "We've had exceptional support through Mayor Chen's program. The technical assistance, financial backing, and community connections made transformation possible in ways individual effort alone could not have achieved. That's precisely why we're modeling our state initiative on this approach," the governor affirmed. "The integration of multiple support systems with farmer-led decision-making creates sustainable outcomes that isolated interventions simply can't match." As the ceremonial portion of the event began, James found himself seated in the front row between Lauren and Emma, watching as Alexander introduced the governor with eloquence and evident passion for the work they had collectively undertaken. The governor's speech was refreshingly substantive, rather than merely ceremonial, detailing the specific components of the new state initiative and acknowledging the Riverdale program's role in demonstrating their effectiveness. What began as a local effort to save struggling farms has evolved into a comprehensive model for agricultural revitalization, she told the assembled crowd and media representatives. The data from the Riverdale program's first year is compelling: water usage reduced by 30% across participating farms, while productivity increased by 25%. 8 new full-time agricultural jobs created significant improvements in soil health metrics, increased availability of nutritious local food in community markets and schools. She gestured toward James and Lauren. "The Harlow farm exemplifies what's possible when we combine traditional agricultural wisdom with innovative approaches and appropriate support systems." 1 year ago, this operation was facing foreclosure despite generations of careful stewardship and the owner's tireless efforts. Today, it's a thriving enterprise that produces not just high-quality food, but educational opportunities, environmental benefits, and community connections. James felt a flush of embarrassment at being singled out so publicly, but Emma beamed with undisguised pride beside him, squeezing his hand supportively. "The state's Rural Agricultural Sustainability Initiative," the governor continued, "will extend similar opportunities to farming communities across our state, with an initial funding allocation of $15 million to support implementation in 20 selected regions during the first phase." A murmur of appreciation ran through the audience at the substantial commitment of resources, far more than most agricultural support programs typically received. This investment reflects our administration's recognition that sustainable local agriculture isn't merely a niche interest, but an essential component of our state's environmental health, economic and resilience, and food security. The governor explained, "The returns in jobs created, resources conserved, communities strengthened, and public health improved far exceed the initial expenditure." As the speech concluded, and ceremonial documents were signed to officially launch the initiative, James found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the depths of near failure to this moment of recognized success and expanded influence, the path had been neither straight nor easy. But its direction had been consistently upward since that pivotal day when Alexandra had appeared on the dusty road beside his fields. The formal ceremony transitioned into a more relaxed reception featuring food bulai, produced by participating farms, giving attendees the opportunity to directly experience the quality that the program fostered. James found himself engaged in conversations with officials from other counties, interested in implementing similar programs in their regions, patiently explaining aspects of their approach that had proven most effective. As the afternoon progressed, he gradually disengaged from the crowds, walking alone to the corner of the property where he had first encountered Alexandra struggling with her broken bike chain. The spot held no particular distinguishing features. A stretch of dirt road bordering a field that now grew healthy barley, instead of struggling corn. But for James, it had acquired a kind of personal significance as the unlikely birthplace of transformation. "I thought I might find you here." Alexandra's voice came from behind him. She had slipped away from her official duties as well, still wearing her formal attire, but with her suit jacket removed in concession to the June mass warmth. "Just needed a moment of quiet," James explained. "It's been a remarkable day." "A remarkable year," Alexandra corrected, coming to stand beside him. "Sometimes I have to remind myself how far we've come in just 12 months. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, looking out over the flourishing fields that bore little resemblance to the struggling operation of a year earlier. "I never properly thanked you," James said finally. Alexandra looked puzzled. "For what, specifically? You've expressed gratitude many times." "Not for the program or the funding or the technical support," James clarified. "Those are all valuable, but they're essentially professional contributions, things any dedicated public servant might have provided. I mean, thank you for seeing something in me in this farm worth fighting for, even when I was at my most skeptical and resistant." Alexandra smiled, understanding dawning in her expression. "You're welcome, though the potential was always there. All I did was recognize it and connect it to resources that could help it flourish." "That's no small thing," James pointed out. "Most people in positions of authority look for the easy wins, the guaranteed successes. You took a chance on a failing farm run by a stubborn man who didn't exactly welcome your initial overtures." "Perhaps," Alexandra acknowledged, "but I'd argue you took the greater risk opening yourself to change and external input when your instinct was to go it alone, as generations of your family had done before." James couldn't dispute that assessment. His acceptance of the program had required him to reconsider deeply held beliefs about self-reliance and independence that had defined his approach to farming throughout his adult life. "I suppose we both stepped outside our comfort zones," he conceded, "and created something neither of us could have managed individually." "That's the essence of community," Alexandra observed. "Interdependence that strengthens rather than diminishes individual capacity." In the distance, they could see Governor Wilson touring the heritage apple orchard, guided by an enthusiastic Emma who was clearly explaining something with animated gestures. Lauren walked alongside, occasionally adding information but primarily watching their daughter with evident pride. "She's going to be a formidable agricultural advocate when she grows up," Alexandra commented, following James's gaze toward Emma. "She combines scientific curiosity with genuine passion for the land, a powerful combination." "She's found her purpose," James agreed softly. "That's all any parent can hope for, that their child discovers what moves them, what matters enough to dedicate themselves to, and sees living examples of that dedication in action," Alexandra added. "Your commitment to this land, through the darkest times, has taught her more than any theoretical lesson could." James nodded, touched by her understanding of his deepest motivation, not just preserving the farm as property, but as a living legacy of values and connection to the land that sustained them. "We should get back," he said after another moment of reflective silence. "They'll be wondering where the guest of honor disappeared to." Alexandra laughed. "You're the guest of honor today, James. I'm just the municipal facilitator who helped connect the dots." As they walked back toward the ceremonial area together, James recognized that their initially unlikely connection had evolved into something he valued deeply, a friendship grounded in mutual respect and shared commitment to the land and community they both served in different DNA ways. The path they had traveled individually and collectively over the past year hadn't been without challenges. There had been setbacks within the program, resistant participants, bureaucratic hurdles, and the eternal uncertainties of agriculture itself. But the foundation they had built, both in terms of practical systems and human connections, had proven surprisingly resilient. Now, with state support expanding their model to farming communities facing similar challenges across the region, the potential impact of their work had grown far beyond anything either of them had initially imagined. What had begun as an effort to save individual farms had evolved into a blueprint for sustainable rural economies that preserved agricultural heritage while embracing innovation. As they rejoined a reception, James was immediately drawn into conversation with a group of farmers from a neighboring county, eager to understand how specific aspects of the program had been implemented at Harlow Bet Farm. He answered their questions patiently, neither minimizing the challenges nor overstating the successes, offering the kind of practical, experience-based knowledge that farmers valued most. Later, as the event wound down and guests gradually departed, the Harlow family and Alexandra found themselves sitting on the farmhouse porch, watching the sunset paint the flourishing fields with golden light. It was a moment of quiet satisfaction after the public ceremonies and official recognition, a chance to simply appreciate what they had collectively built. "So, what comes next?" Lauren asked, directing the question to both James and Alexandra. "Where do we go from here?" James considered the question thoughtfully. "For the farm itself, we continue building on the foundation we've established, expanding the heritage orchard, refining our soil restoration techniques, developing new value-added products. We've only just begun to realize the potential of what we have here." End quote. Alexandra nodded in agreement. "And for the broader program, we need to ensure that the transition to state sponsorship maintains the core principles that made it effective locally: farmer leadership, integrated support systems, community connection." "Will you stay involved when it becomes a state initiative?" Emma asked her directly. "Absolutely," Alexandra replied without hesitation. "I'll be serving on the Implementation Advisory Board, helping to guide the expansion while ensuring we don't lose the essential elements in scaling up." Lauren smiled. "It's remarkable to think about how much has changed in just 1 year, not just for our farm, but for the entire agricultural community around Riverdale." "And it all started with a broken bike chain," Emma added with the straightforward clarity that children often bring to complex situations. The adults exchanged amused glances, acknowledging the simple truth in her observation. A seemingly minor mechanical failure had created an unexpected connection that had ultimately transformed not just individual lives, but an entire approach to rural agricultural development. "I've been thinking about that first day," Alexandra said reflectively. "What if I had taken a different route on my reconnaissance ride? What if James had been working in another field and hadn't seen me struggling with the chain? What if I decided it wasn't my problem and just kept going?" "Ha," James added. "But you didn't," Lauren pointed out. "Neither of you chose the path of disconnection or indifference. You both recognized something worth engaging with, a person who needed help, a community worth investing in. The technical term for that is social capital," Alexandra observed. "The connections and relationships that make communities resilient and productive. But it really comes down to basic human recognition and response, seeing needs and capabilities in others and connecting them in ways that create new possibilities." As darkness fell, and the first stars appeared above the thriving fields that had so recently faced an uncertain future, James felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected chain of events, beginning with a literal broken chant that had led to this moment of fulfillment and promise. The farm that had been in his family for generations would continue, not as a struggling remnant of a fading way of life, but as a vibrant, innovative enterprise, connecting traditional agricultural wisdom with sustainable practices for the future. The community that had been fragmenting under economic pressures had found new cohesion and shared purpose, and his daughter would grow up with hope rather than despair as her inheritance, seeing firsthand that seemingly insurmountable challenges could be overcome through collaboration and creativity. All because a cyclist had broken down on a dusty road, and a struggling farmer had chosen to help. "You know what I think?" Emma said, breaking the contemplative silence that had settled over the porch. "I think sometimes small acts of kindness are really the beginning of big changes. We just don't usually get to see where they lead." The adults exchanged surprised glances at the wisdom in her observation. "I think you're exactly right," Alexandra affirmed softly. "The connections that transform communities often begin with the simplest human interactions, moments of recognition and response that create openings for something new to emerge." James nodded in agreement, his gaze traveling over the darkening contours of the land his family had stewarded for generations. Land that would now continue under their care into an uncertain but hopeful future, sustained by the web of relationships and support systems they had collectively created. "Something to remember," he said quietly. "The next time we encounter a stranger in need on a dusty road. Or anywhere else," Lauren added. As night fully descended, wrapping the farm in a gentle darkness, illuminated only by starlight and the warm glow from the farmhouse windows, the conversation turned to more immediate matters: tomorrow's tasks, upcoming projects, the practical details of agricultural life that continued regardless of ceremonies or recognition. Yet underlying this everyday discussion was a shared awareness that they had been part of something extraordinary, a transformation that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into a model with the potential to revitalize rural communities far beyond their own. In the complex interplay of individual choices and collective action, policy frameworks and personal connections, they had discovered a pathway toward agricultural sustainability that honored the past while embracing the future, creating abundance, not through exploitation, but through stewardship, innovation, and genuine res. Community. The broken bike chain that had initially connected them had been repaired long ago, but the human connections it had catalyzed continued to strengthen and expand, creating resilience and possibility where once there had been only isolation and impending loss. Sometimes, James reflected as the evening drew to a close, the most profound transformations began with the most ordinary moments. A chance encounter, a small kindness, a willingness to engage rather than turn away. And sometimes, the helping hand extended to a stranger in need returned a hundredfold in unexpected ways, opening doors to possibilities previously unimagined. As he had told Alexandra at the ceremonial field earlier that day, the precise mechanism of their meeting, whether chance or fate or something in between, mattered less than the choices they had made in response to that meeting. It was their mutual recognition of something worth connecting with, worth building upon, that had created the foundation for everything that followed. In the end, perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of their shared journey. That transformation, whether of a single farm or an entire agricultural system, began with connection, with seeing one another's humanity and potential across the artificial barriers of role, status, or circumstance that too often kept people isolated in their individual struggles. A broken bike chain, a struggling farm, a mayor with vision, a community in transition. Individually, each faced limitations and constraints. Together, they had created something truly sustaining, not just economically viable, but socially meaningful and environmentally responsible. A model not just for growing food, but for growing community. And it had all begun with that simplest of human choices, the decision to stop and help a stranger on a dusty road on a hot summer day, expecting nothing in return.